And to discuss the economic partnership between India and Brussels and between India and the European Union, we are joined by Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former senior diplomat. Welcome, Mr. Mukherjee, to Newsnight. Prime Minister today said for India-Belgium ties that even sky is not the limit. The fact is that India and Belgium enjoy trade so much so that India has the second largest trade within EU with Belgium, just after Germany. But would you say that there is a lot of untapped economic potential in bilateral ties?
Well, there certainly is. Belgium is, in per capita terms, among the richest countries in the European Union, although it's one of the smaller countries. But the focus really has been, in terms of the quantum of trade, has been on the diamond trade. Because something like
80%.
over 80% of the diamonds produced in the world flow through Antwerp. And
they
more
also
than
constitute 80% of the bilateral trade between India and Belgium.
It's mostly based on diamonds, but there are various other elements in trade, but the focus has been basically on diamonds. And don't forget that 70 to 80% of the world's diamonds are actually polished in India, although we are not a diamond producer.
In Surat particularly.
So there's a natural fit over there. And in a purely Indian sense, some of the largest diamond traders in Antwerp are actually Indians, and almost all of them, and this is appropriate in terms of our Prime Minister's visit, most of them are from Gujarat.
Absolutely.
But Belgium apart, I think when you're talking about trade and economic relations, I think if you take the European Union as a whole, the visit becomes very, very much more significant in economic terms. Europe, the countries of the European Union together form our largest trading partner on all three counts actually, in terms of trade, in terms of investment,
FDI,
and in terms of transfer of technology. Europe looms large. So the summit that the Prime Minister attended, leading our delegation, is coming after 4 years. It's been delayed mostly because of pressure from Italy.
There have been extraneous issues, but since we are short of time, Mr. Mukherjee, the fact is, like you said, that EU is India's biggest trading partner, biggest foreign investment destination, and also biggest entrant of foreign investment, or FDI. Now, that does not apply in a reciprocal sense, because if you look at India, then India is EU's 9th largest trading partner. And the same does not apply to foreign direct investment as well. So how can that gap be bridged? How can there be greater parity in terms of trade and investment?
You know, it is very common, but not quite appropriate to think in terms of balance of trade all the time. Balancing trade sometimes is possible and a worthy objective, and very often it's not. And it need not worry us as long as our objectives are met. I mean, there are certain countries with whom we have a negative balance of trade. Certain countries, for instance, which supply us oil and where our exports are limited to a certain, a far smaller quantum. So as far as Europe is concerned, as long as our exports grow, as long as we continue to be an attractive investment destination, and as long as we home in on transfer of technology, and here other elements come in, such as, for instance, the negotiations that we are engaged in with our important trading partners, not just Europe, in terms of intellectual property rights and so on, our role in the World Trade Organization. We should not really focus simply on whether our trade whether our trade is actually evenly balanced.
Okay. So you're saying let's not be unduly worried about that.
We need not be.
Another fact of the relationship between India and EU is that the BTIA, the Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement, has been pending since 2007. Looking at the sticking points that are there between India and the EU, do you expect them to be thrashed out anytime soon?
Well, I think so. I think we are very close to an agreement. There have been delays on various grounds. You know, this is a very important agreement and it involves a very, very large market like India and a very, very large economic entity which is the European Union. And there are issues today, in fact, which are very important to us and which need very, very careful negotiation. For instance, I mentioned the question of intellectual property rights in the area of pharmaceuticals, for instance. There are certain fundamentals in that where India won't budge and
Absolutely,
should
but
not
so
budge.
far these concerns seemed totally intractable as far as resolution is
Well,
concerned.
nothing
because-
is intractable. Nothing is intractable given political will. And I think we are very close to an agreement on there. For instance, under European law, which has been passed some years ago, the European Parliament holds a veto on all trade agreements on grounds of human rights. They must sign off on the fact that the country concerned, the partner country concerned, fits in with their parameters on human rights. And many countries, not just India, feel, quite rightly, that is just a facade for the use of this particular subject as a non-tariff barrier whenever it is convenient to do so.
Okay.
And so these are
There are other
things that
concerns
have
as
to be
well,
negotiated
because
in good faith.
I understand that EU wants India to bring down its agricultural tariffs, and also that EU wants India to bring down the kind of import duties that we put on their cars.
Certainly.
And there are also concerns that India has vis-a-vis its software professionals. Why should there be different visas for different EU
These are,
countries?
as I said,
and
these
different
are
work
exactly
permits?
issues that have to be negotiated. We have valid concerns on the question of the access our software professionals need in markets where they have contracts. And when they are deliberately, on one pretext or the other, prevented from doing so, it is actually a non-tariff barrier. So this has to be negotiated, and this is the same problem we have with the US very often on intellectual property rights. I mentioned the area of pharmaceuticals and patents. Now, we have a point of view here, which we think is absolutely based on very correct basis. But as I said, these things will have to be, the negotiations are sometimes glacial. There are lobbies and interests of various industrial sectors
So
on both sides.
you are, in other words, hopeful that they'll be thrashed out sooner
They
than later?
will be, because overall the trade and investment treaty will be beneficial to both sides. I mean, otherwise, why would both sides go through all this tortuous negotiations?
Now, we are also putting up with global reality where a TTIP is under progress, or a TTP is under progress. Does that mean that it becomes all the more exigent for India and the EU to seal this, because you have a limited quantum of world trade? If a particular block of countries diverted towards them, what is left for India? I mean, in a broader sense is what I'm talking about. So does that make a need for such an FTA or BTIA even more exigent?
Well, this is a very important question. It's also a very complicated one. We have consciously joined in this global movement towards more and more free trade, and this whole movement towards globalization. We've embraced it, and it's been very good for India. There are certain flaws in the system which we want other countries to address, and this is a matter of negotiation. But when, for instance, a global arrangement like the WTO falls down because our very legitimate concerns on agriculture and the livelihood of our farmers is not met, I mean, just consider that the average subsidy for a European cow is $8 a day, and we have farmers, millions of farmers, who live on less than $1.50 a day, below the poverty line. So we have legitimate concerns, and what happens then is, if these concerns are not met through a globally accepted agreement, then you have what is happening in the world today, a whole raft of bilateral free trade agreements, because there's no alternative. So we have bilateral free trade agreements with our neighbors, with Sri Lanka. We have the same with ASEAN as a whole, with individual ASEAN countries, and so on. This is a matter for our government to make the best choice that it can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Mukherjee, for having joined us on Newsnight tonight and for giving us your perspective on the India-EU economic partnership.
Thank you.